Hello, my name is Veronica Scott. If you are working in construction, you may have heard about the Silica standard and Table 1. But what is Table 1 and how do I use it? I am here to help walk you through that. First, what is silica? Silica is found in many common construction materials, including sand, stone, concrete, brick, and mortar. Silica dust is created by cutting, grinding, drilling, or crushing these materials. Respirable silica is the smallest fraction of that dust that can be breathed into the deepest parts of the lungs. When silica reaches these deep areas of the lungs, it cannot be expelled or absorbed by the body, so it can cause lung scarring, lung cancer, or other respiratory diseases. Because silica poses a danger to employees' health, OSHA developed a standard to specifically address this hazard. Table 1 inside the Silica Standard for Construction was developed by OSHA with input from industry interest groups to address 18 of the most common tasks in construction. This alleviates the need to conduct employee exposure monitoring and still provides employees with the protection they need. The table is set up into 3 columns, 1 defining the task, 1 explaining the engineering and work practice control measures required for that task, and the final one listing required respiratory protection for that task. Everything in Table 1 must be followed exactly in order to be used in the workplace. If we look at the first example, stationary masonry saws, this task is only for stationary saws. If it is handheld, this section cannot be used for that work. The saw must have an integrated water delivery system that continuously feeds water to the blade. If you cannot have a continuous flow of water, you cannot use Table 1 to protect your employees. You are also required to operate the tool in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions to reduce dust emissions. Then, in the last column, this indicates for this task, employees do not have to have any respiratory protection regardless of the length of the task. This is the second example where we can look at handheld power saws. In order to use Table 1 to protect employees, the saw must be integrated with a water delivery system that feeds water continuously to the blade. You may notice this common theme for many of the tasks. That is because water fed at the source of work can greatly reduce the amount of respirable dust produced by that work and is a common engineering control to manage silica exposure. In addition to the water system, operators must follow manufacturer's guidelines to minimize dust emissions. You must ask yourself 2 questions to determine what, if any, respiratory protection is required for this task. 1. Will this activity take place outside or in an enclosed area? 2. Will the work take more or less than 4 hours to complete? The distinction between indoor and outdoor work is made because enclosed spaces reduce air circulation and can create much higher concentrations of dust. The table indicates that when outdoors and using handheld power saws for less than 4 hours, no respiratory protection is required. But if that work takes more than 4 hours, respiratory protection with an assigned protection factor of 10 is required. When working indoors, we can see that there is no difference in the required respiratory protection for more or less than 4 hours of work. Regardless of the task length, you must supply respiratory protection with an assigned protection factor of at least 10. If, for some reason, you cannot follow Table 1 exactly, you are required to assess worker exposure to silica. That can be done by monitoring, or if there is research to indicate that the task will never result in exposures above the PEL for 50 micrograms per cubic meter, you can use that data. In addition to addressing exposure, you have to protect workers from that exposure. Use safe work practices that reduce dust exposure, and finally, you must provide respirators when you cannot limit exposure to below the PEL.